Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to be giving you my recap and thoughts on episode 3 of It's Okay to Not Be Okay that was just released on Netflix. I gotta say, first and foremost, I was blown away by this episode and all the characters we're introduced to in the world that the writers and director have created. It's just such a complex world, and we get to meet some of the patients and staff at the OK Psychiatric Hospital, and we also start to find out more about Moon Young, her past, and some insight into her mother, and maybe even what happened to her. Like, it's obvious that she had a very traumatic childhood, but we really get to see that in this episode. So let's get into what happened, and I'll give my thoughts at the end. Since there seems to be a connection with the titles that each episode is given, the title of this episode is called The Sleeping Witch. I think it has something to do with the scene where poor Moon Young is stuck in a nightmare sleep paralysis state, but I could be wrong, but I feel like that's what the title is talking about. We start off the episode a little before Moon Young appears in front of Kang Tae at the hospital, and Park Hung Jae, who is the lead nurse at the hospital, is telling Kang Tae about how the lights sometimes go out during storms, and implies that it might be because the hospital was built on a cemetery and they just have angry spirits everywhere, and to be careful about roaming the halls at night. Kang Tae, not fazed by what she's talking about, says he's gonna go call maintenance. This is when Moon Young appears before Kang Tae and he asks why she's there, and she responds that she missed him. When he goes outside to talk with her and ask what exactly she wants, she says straightforward that she wants him and tells him that she always gets what she wants, whether she steals it or someone gives it to her, and to just kind of, give in. This is also when she tells him that she does remember him from when they were kids by telling him how impressed she is by the man that he's grown into, and that it's definitely more of an evolution than anything, implying that he's so hot. As she continues to be very forward with him and wants him to eat with her, they are interrupted by the head nurse saying that the director of the hospital wants to meet with Moon Young since she's Go Do-won's guardian. This is when we meet the director of the hospital, who's named Oh-ji Wang, who is also the doctor Kang Tae had researched and seen had specialized in PTSD patients, which was another reason for why he decided to move and work at that hospital. He seems to be an interesting character as well. His office is full of different religious artifacts from all over the world, as well as relics that seem to have different healing properties, such as the artifact that we see Moon Young steal from his office, which is supposed to help with sleep paralysis. We find this out later when he's looking for it, since he needs it when he takes a nap, and it's very interesting since she steals it, and in a later scene, after we see her move back into her family's mansion, she also has a very scary nightmare, and it looks like she's suffering from sleep paralysis as well. So when we learned that, I wondered if she recognized that item as something that's supposed to ward off sleep paralysis, and that's why she stole it, in hopes that maybe it helps her with her nightmares that she's having and apparent sleep paralysis. It's also implied by the CEO of the publishing company that she deals with nightmares, so this seems to be something that she deals with. When the director is giving Moon Young the update on her father and his condition after his surgery, the director is very blunt about it and is also telling her how strange her father's condition is, to the head nurse's dismay. The nurse tries to smooth things over, thinking Moon Young cares about her father, and this seems to be the director's MO, and he's a little oblivious that maybe things that he says, like, oh, your father is a very strange patient, is maybe not the best way to talk to the guardian. But we know that Moon Young doesn't care and isn't upset by what the director says, and even asks as a dark joke that it sounds like her father is possessed and maybe she should hire an exorcist. I think she also makes that comment given the artifacts in the director's office. When she says this, the director just smiles and says he has a different prescription for him and the guardian, and this is when he tells her about the therapy programs they have at the hospital and that she should teach a reading-writing class there, and her terms and conditions are she would also get to take her father on a walk for 30 minutes either every day or every week. Moon Young's response is, shouldn't I be telling you what my terms are instead of you giving me the terms? And that's just kind of how we leave it off. We don't hear her say yes or no, but we do see her leaving the office tearing up the flyer. But we obviously do see her later on in the episode teaching a reading writing class that Kang-bae is a part of because he's bringing the patients to it. I think she also decides to do this for the publicity and as a cover story, since while all this is going on, the CEO of the publishing company is still trying to put out that press fire that she caused. And as they're, knocking back ideas of what to put out in the press to sort of calm the waters, she suggests that he tell people that she's in her hometown with her father who's ill, and that she's considering retiring from writing to stay and take care of her father. Which obviously is not the case, since later in the episode, when the nurse tries to stop her from leaving after her class, telling her, hey, your father's ready for the walk, she's like, I didn't agree to that, and drives off, almost running the nurse over. And before even that, we see her walk right past her father, who recognizes her and starts to freak out, and she doesn't even acknowledge him. After the meeting with the director, Moon-young finds her way back to Kang-tae, who's in the changing room and has just finished having a small argument with one of the other staff members, who generally seems to give everyone of authority at the hospital a hard time and just doesn't seem to take his job seriously. As the guy leaves, Moon-young appears before Kang-tae and is practically drooling over his abs, and with no shame at all, just looks at him and ogles his body. When she goes to try and touch him though, graze those abs, he stops her and drags her out of the changing room, still shirtless, and into the hallway so everyone sees her and him. Juri is also in the hallway and later confronts Moon-young, asking her to not tell anybody that they know each other and how she knows Kang-tae. When Kang-tae is at the end of his shift and is calling his friend, since I think he was supposed to come pick him up, Moon-young again appears in her car and tries to once again get him to come eat with her. He says no, and she can tell that she's starting to annoy him, so she says that she'll admit defeat today, but next time she's going to kidnap him if he says no. Something I noticed in this scene is when she asks if he doesn't want to eat with her because he's eating with his brother and suggests that he can come along and they can do their meet and greet, that she still owes him. This is what sets Kang-tae off and tells her that her bulldozing techniques may work on others, but they will never work on him. We then have scenes of Moon-young heading to her family's mansion, and through the CEO of the publishing company's VO, who is looking at the info his assistant had sent to Moon-young about Kang-tae, talks about the secluded mansion that her father had built when Moon-young was born and how it's basically haunted due to everything that happened there with Moon-young's mother and father. When his assistant, who he's telling this all to, asks what exactly happened, he says, "Don't pry." This isn't really relevant to the story exactly, but I think it definitely shows how erratic Moon-young is. But there's a scene in which she's driving to the house where she almost hits a deer because she sees something in her rear view mirror which looked to me like a little ghost girl, or maybe it was her and she's having, visions or something. The deer just stands in front of the car screaming, and her response is to scream right back at the deer like the deer, and they just end up having a scream off in the middle of the road. Meanwhile, we find out that Kang-tae is living on the rooftop apartment of Juri's family home and his friend is living in the basement. We see them all eating dinner on the roof, and Juri's mother is being very attentive to Kang-tae, which his friend tries to whisper to Sang-tae that this means that she wants Kang-tae to be her son-in-law. That same night is when we see what I first thought was a haunting taking place at Moon-young's family home, since we see her sleeping and it gets really cold in the room and then someone writes "welcome" on the window. But then they make it seem like she's just having a really vivid and scary nightmare that involves her mother as a ghost. And like I mentioned earlier, seems to be suffering from sleep paralysis because it's like her eyes are wide open and she seems like she's unable to move. We hear a voice, I'm assuming her mother, telling the story of Sleeping Beauty while hovering over Moon-young and then laying next to her, stroking her face and telling her that if the prince comes to save her, like in Sleeping Beauty, she would kill him. We also see what I think is a flashback of young Moon-young standing on a pier looking down at the water in a lake. There's a body in the water. Super creepy. When she finally wakes up, she's obviously very upset and ends up having to calm herself down by thinking of Kang-tae and holding herself in the butterfly pose that he taught her while pretending that it's him holding her gently and lovingly. The next day, or maybe a few days later, they don't really give us dates, we are introduced to a new patient who is admitted and has a manic disorder, which leads him to removing his clothing and flashing people and overall just having episodes of hyperactive, reckless behavior that gets him admitted to the hospital on a regular basis, it seems, since all the staff know him and he knows them. This time he was at a club running away after his card was declined, and he owed a lot of money since he told everyone that everything was on him that night, and while running away caused, a bunch of accidents because he was running in traffic, and because he got hot, he just had to take all of his clothes off. Apparently he's the son of a local politician who's campaigning at the moment, and one of the promises that he's actually making is he will close down the OK Psychiatric Hospital if he's elected. So even though his son is dealing with mental illness, he doesn't seem to care or even acknowledge that he exists. The nurses warn the staff to keep an eye on him since he tends to try and run, which we see later on in the episode. Song-tae is working at the shop, and Jung-se is paying him 100,000 won to draw caricatures of the customers that come in as a grand opening promotion. It seems Kang-tae doesn't know what Song-tae is doing, and Song-tae thinks his brother is going to find out and kick him out of the house since he's supposed to be in school and he's lying about what he's doing. But really, it's more like he's wanting to surprise his brother and save up money for something, but he can't really tell the difference, and so he starts freaking out a little bit, but Jung-se calms him down and is like, look, this is what we discussed, go draw those customers. After that, we see Kang-tae taking the patients to the therapy room for the class where he finds out it's Moon-young teaching it. During the class, she explains the truth behind fairy tales using different examples, asking the class what they think the moral of the story is, and then her telling them what it really is, which the truth is rather morbid and upsetting. And both the nurse and Kang-tae are kind of getting worried since what she's telling the patients isn't really good for their mental state. And she doesn't seem to feel a lot of empathy for the patients and what they're going through. We see this when one patient starts to cry after she gives her guess as to what the meaning or the lesson you're supposed to learn from the Tale of the Little Mermaid is. And when she gives her answer, it causes another patient to bring up her past, which involves her letting her husband beat her to an inch of her life for years and years. Now, this woman is obviously suffering from depression and other things and starts crying, and Moon-young's response to that is, if you're gonna cry, you should do it outside of the class. When the class is over and Kang-tae is cleaning the room, Moon-young asks him what he thought of her class. He asks if she really believes what she said, which was basically that when you accept reality and not live in a fairy tale, you'll live a better life. And she says yes, since she wholeheartedly accepts that, and you should just accept reality, be yourself, and not care what others think. Kang-tae tries to give the excuse that, yeah, that sounds nice in an ideal world, but that's just not how the world works. And Moon-young, wanting to end this conversation, pretends to be bored to kind of signal, hey, I don't want to hear your excuses. She then tells Kang-tae that he should admit he's not satisfied with his life. He acts like he doesn't know what she's talking about, and to get a rise out of him, and I think to also just hit on him blatantly some more, she asks him why he only smiles at the patients and not her, and that she really liked how he treated her the other night. Confused by this, she explains how she had had a dream about him and describes what he did, which embarrasses him, and he asks her to stop, but she doesn't.
인정. 조용히 안 해. 나랑 한번 잘래? 왜?
This leads him to taking her to a part of the hospital that's under construction so they can have a private conversation, and he asks her again to stop messing with him. When he says he doesn't have time to play around with her, she responds back by saying, if you had time, you'd play along. And he tells her to kind of stop jumping to conclusions or like misinterpreting what he's saying. During this conversation, she tells him he needs to have some fun and he's gonna get sick if he doesn't. He responds by asking her what she knows about him exactly and why she acts up like she does. And instead of answering him, she just calls him a hypocrite. While this is going on, we see that Song-tae has come to the hospital to meet with the director to see if he can help with his PTSD and the butterfly nightmares, kind of get to the root of it all. Before he does though, he thinks he sees Moon-young and goes to try and catch up with her. Since she's far away and Song-tae is able to stop him from catching up, he isn't 100% positive if it was her, and when he tells Kang-tae, his brother's like, no, it couldn't have been her, like why would she be here? Even though he was just with her, he's straight up lying to his brother, which shows he really doesn't want him to ever meet Moon-young, which frankly, I'd be worried about as well. After Kang-tae and the director meet and bond over dinosaurs, the director prescribes that he should paint a mural of the landscape that's outside of his window on a wall in the hospital. He says that based on what the picture ends up looking like, he'll pay him some money, and this really excites Song-tae since he's trying to make some money. We find out he's saving up to buy an RV so him and his brother don't have to move all the time. They can just live in the RV, and if the butterflies come, they can just drive away in their home, so it's less stressful for both of them. Kang-tae is so touched by this and holds Song-tae, telling him all he needs is to be with him and that nothing else matters. This was just so touching, and it's so amazing and sweet how even though Song-tae is obviously living with these challenges, he's still trying to be the best big brother he can and looking out for his little brother. Oh! We later see Kang-tae looking up prices for what looks to be used RVs, since I think he's planning on buying one now that he knows Song-tae's plan. And when Juri sees this, since they're both driving together to work, she asks if he wants to rent one and go camping together sometime. You know, take advantage, see if she can get a little date out of him. Kang-tae says sure when they both have time off, and she gets super excited and starts planning immediately, like, oh yeah, I'll look at next month's schedule, we'll figure it out. However, this is when Kang-tae gets the call about what's happening at the hospital. The patient, who we met earlier in the episode, has escaped the hospital, and it appears that Moon-young met him outside. And after he flashed her, she got out of her car and basically called what he had a teeny weeny, which seemed to actually calm him down. And she tells him to get in her car, mentioning that Kang-bae should be on his way to work. Now, if I had to guess as to her motivation, I think it was to give Kang-bae a little more excitement in his life, since he ends up chasing her down to get the patient back. She ends up driving off, and Kang-tae chases after her in Juri's car, and even though it just seems like she's causing chaos, I feel like she actually ends up helping the patient who, after an exciting car ride and almost running over Kang-bae and being chased by the police, ends up at his father's campaign rally, where he gets on the stage and tells everyone who he is, his mental condition, that this guy is his father and the family are ashamed of him because of his condition, and that all he's ever wanted was his father's recognition and attention, and that's a big reason for why he's acted out all this time. While this is happening, both Moon-young and Kang-tae are just standing in the crowd watching this all go down. When Moon-young sees Kang-tae, and it seems like he's noticing how happy and free the patient is up on the stage, she ends up going to Kang-tae and commenting, hey, look how happy the patient is. Kang-tae responds by looking at her and asking, should I just have fun with you then? And that's how they end the episode. Now, I loved this episode and all the new characters that we're introduced to. The cinematography, music, amazing. Like the haunted house scene, crazy. Like just the set design alone and everything that Moon-young wore in this episode, like flawless, beautiful, amazing, spectacular, all the things. The patient, who's the son of a politician, was really great. I think he did a really fantastic job with the role he had and made his character stand out. And I'm not just talking about all the nudity. While he was on stage talking to the audience about his condition and how his family treated him because of it and not being as smart, the emotions behind his eyes and just the pain, you could feel it, and that was really amazing. I totally believed what he was feeling, and I'm glad that they did that, since until that point I was feeling like they were just making fun of his condition a little too much for my taste, and I was worried that people wouldn't take what was going on with him seriously. And also how the actor portrayed the illness and the scene that we got with his point of view of the night that everything happened that got him sent to the hospital, and also his understanding of his condition, I think lessened the comedic aspect of it. And I think it showed in a more semi-educational way as well. I think they really hit this home though when after we saw that POV during the episode, in the ending credits, we see another side of him when he's telling that story. Because we're seeing him in his own head, what he thinks is real in his environment, when really he's in the hospital interacting with the patients and the doctor while he tells the story and reenacting it. And so it's sort of from Kang Tae and everyone else's perspective, and you can just really see how the illness affects him. And as always, the way that Kang Tae was with his patients and his brother, just so heartwarming and sweet, and he can do no wrong. And we also got another shirtless scene, though him technically being sexually harassed by Moon-wong should be a serious matter. I'm sorry, he's just hot. I was trying to graze those abs from the television. I do like that we see that sexual harassment can also be done by women. So whether they realized it or not, they're setting some equal ground there. That nightmare scene with Moon-young and her mother as a ghost was really well done. I was so creeped out by the actor, whoever is playing the mother in that scene. But I feel like that it wasn't just a nightmare, but she was also reliving something her mother actually said and maybe did, implying that she would kill any prince that came to save her. So maybe that's why when she was young, she rejected Kang Tae and tried to scare him away because she thought that her mother would kill him. And I'm really interested to find out what all was going on with the person in the water that she's just watching either drown or die in front of her. Moon-young is just a very complex character, I gotta say. And I also really love how thirsty she is for Kang Tae, just outwardly, wow. Overall, fantastic episode, like I mentioned, and I can't wait for the next one and learning more about the characters, and I'm interested to see what other patients we're introduced to, besides what seems to be the sort of consistent ones that we've met so far. With that, I'm going to end this video. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you're informed when my next video is up. And until then, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time. Bye.